One of the advantages of digital documents is that the space you work with, the layout, in other words, doesn't have to be static. It can be dynamic. It can change based on how the viewer interacts with it. For your final project, you're going to create an interactive PDF in which you will display all the projects you've done so far in Comm 317, and you'll also write a brief self-critique about each one. This video takes you through the steps of working with images and buttons in InDesign to make dynamic and interactive layouts. You can adapt this technique into the layouts you create for your final project. For your lab exercise, you're going to create an interactive PDF document that looks something like this. I'll give you the images that you're going to work with already sized and cropped, and that's an important concept here. As you create these interactive PDF documents, you want to prep all of your images in Photoshop and get them to the size and the resolution that you want to actually use in your finished document. You don't want to do a lot of resizing in InDesign, because file size on this overall project is really crucial, and you want to keep the file size really small, so you need to do your image prep ahead of time. In terms of interactivity, you can take something like this that appears to be like a standard static print layout, and then give your viewer some cues as to what they can do with it. So here you've got this print kind of layout, but it says click on a thumbnail to enlarge, and then click again on the enlarged image to make it disappear. And what you have is something that looks like this. So we click on this thumbnail, and it appears as a larger image. When we're done looking at that, the larger image that's taking up more of the space, we just click on it again and it goes away. Same thing with the second thumbnail and the third thumbnail, and so on. So let's make an interactive PDF. So let's go into InDesign, and we're going to create a new document. And I'm going to create this for web, and I'm going to make it 800 by 600 pixels. That's the size you're going to use for your project 5. In this particular example, I'm going to use 6 columns. You can use however many you want to based on based on your rough layouts and what you think makes the most sense. So we're creating a new document, and here's our blank document that we're going to work with. Okay, to save some time on the video, I've already assembled some of the layout elements that you already know how to do in InDesign. I brought in a headline, caption, brought in our thumbnail images that we're going to be working with, and the background images. These images are already provided for you in the lab assignment in this folder here. The background image is Flamingo Transparent. Notice these are all PSD files. You can bring in PSD files or JPEGs, however you want to do it. On this background image, I placed it, scaled it just a little bit, and then set the transparency to 60%, so it's not a full image, it's more of a background image. This one right here, the top one, is the Harris Hawk thumbnail. The middle one is the Takahe thumbnail. There are only about 300 Takahes left surviving in the world. They're a really cool bird. And this one at the bottom is the parrot thumbnail. Each one of these thumbnail images is 113 pixels wide by 115 pixels tall. That's fairly square. I've already sized those for you in Photoshop, so all you have to do is import them, and you shouldn't have to do any resizing on them. Next, I want to bring in my expanded size images, the ones that are going to, where I click here, they're going to display over here in their full size. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, Place, Once again, I've already sized these images ahead of time in Photoshop. I've already created a naming kind of hierarchy so I can find them quickly with a thumbnail, then full size, and so on. So that kind of stuff is important in a project like this where you've got lots of different files. Develop a nomenclature that's going to help you find your files and keep things organized. So we'll start with the Harris Hawk full size. And then place that, and see it's already sized, so all I have to do is kind of drag it into the position where I want it to be, and that's okay. Now we're going to place the second one. That will be the Takahe full size. And drag it into position. Maybe about there. And then finally the third one, which will be the parrot full size. File, place, or Command D. And that's Parrot in the Rain. And there are the three files that we're going to use in this particular layout. Okay, now we are ready to start creating the interactive features, or the buttons. In this case is what we're going to be doing in InDesign. And so the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're working in the correct workspace. And right now I'm working in the advanced workspace, and what we want to do is be in the interactive for PDF workspace. So we change it to that, and now we see that we've got a different set of panels here, and the one we're going to be working with is called Buttons and Forms. Okay, let's get to what you bought your ticket for, the interactive features. So what we're going to do is click on this Buttons and Forms panel, and you can see that it's actually just not really doing much. Most everything is grayed out, and that's because we have to actually select something first. So let's go over to our first image here, and with our direct selection tool, we're going to click on it, and notice that now we have a few things highlighted. What we're going to do is click on this little button down here that says Convert to Button, the one right by the trash bin. And we click on that, and now this changes this object to a button. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name because we're going to have 6 buttons just on this page, so we need to keep them straight. I'm just going to call this one thumb. And then the next option is what the event is, or where the animation starts, or how the animation starts. And your options are these: click, roll over, roll off, and so on. We're just going to do on click for this particular exercise. We're going to make them all clickable buttons. Okay, so that one's set. Now let's do the other two thumbnails. So let's click on the middle one, the Takahe. Select it, go to Convert to Button. Now it's a button. We're going to click in here, name it, I think it should be a 2 thumb, and the event is on click. And then the third one, Convert to Button, call it 3 thumb, and on click. Now let's do the other images here. So the one here in the back is the Harris Hawk, and you can't see it because the other two are in front of it, but we know it's there. So we're going to click on that. We're going to click on Convert to Button, and this one we're going to call one, let's say one big. And this will also be on click, but we want to add the feature here of hidden until triggered. And what that means is that when the viewer comes to this page, we don't want them seeing these 3 images. What we want this to be a blank space until they click on it. And that's what the hidden until triggered will give us. Okay, so that's the first one. Now let's click on our Takahe. It looks like we've got him selected there. Convert to Button. That's going to be 2 big, too big. On click, hidden until triggered. And then let's do our last one, which is going to be the parrot. Convert to button. We'll call this 3 big on click and hidden until triggered. Now that we have our buttons set up, we need to create the animations or the actions that go in between them. And this can seem a little bit complicated, but the important thing is to just kind of take a step back and think about, for each one of these buttons that we've created, what is it that we want it to do when we click on it? Okay, so let's look at our first one here, the Harris Hawk, which is one thumb. Okay, so our first thumbnail button is the one we're going to work with first. Now, keep in mind that the way we set this up is that when the viewer lands on the page, they'll see the text, they'll see this background image of the flamingo, they'll see the thumbnails, this copy here, that tells them to click, but they're not supposed to see these 3 images. That's why we set these as hidden until triggered in the buttons. So what we want this image to do is that when you click on it, it should show the larger image of the Harris Hawk, which is the one that's hiding behind here. Now, if we want to see a preview of what we have, we can do that in the interactive features. And right down here at the very bottom of this, there is it looks like a little video player icon. It's quite small, but it's your preview spread for e-publishing. So if we click on that, it takes a little second to come up. Let's see if I can drag it and make it a little bit bigger. This is what the spread will look like when the viewer lands on it. And we've got these buttons here, but we haven't put any action on them, so there's nothing happening to them when we click on them. The cursor knows that it's a button, that's where the hand comes up, but there's no action associated with it. So that's what we want to do now, is we want to create the actions to make these images appear and disappear when we click. So let's get some action going here. So we're going to create an action for this thumbnail, wherein when we click on it, it should make the larger image appear. So we've got our thumbnail selected. It's one thumb is the name of it. The event is on click. Now what we need to do is add an action to that particular event, which is the click event. So if we click on this action, this plus action, we see a whole long list of possible actions that can happen. This is also what you'll do when you want to move pages from like next page, previous page, stuff like that. You'll do the same kind of thing when you're setting up your page navigation in your interactive PDF. But the one that we want to do for this particular action is the show, hide, buttons, and forms. And we click on this, and now we see another whole set of options that comes up here that is the listing of all the available options that we have, which are the 6 different buttons that we have created on this page. So what do we do with all of this information? Let's figure this out. If we look at this, we see that our 3 thumbnails and our 3 big images, all of these are buttons, they all have an X next to them. And X, if we go down here and highlight the X, that means ignore. In other words, that means it's not part of the action that we're setting. Okay, the other options are in the little eyeball there that says show, and then the middle option is the eyeball with the slash through it, which is hide. So we've got 3 options: show, hide, and ignore. Now, what do we want all 6 images to do when we click on this thumbnail? These 3 images are already going to be visible, so we don't want them to change. So ignore is the appropriate choice for each of the 3 thumbnails, and that's the default choice. Now for the 3 bigger images, remember they're going to be invisible at the time when we land on this page. Remember when we went to the e-publishing preview, these are going to be not visible. And so if their current action is that they're not visible, we don't really want this picture of the parrot to do anything when we click on the picture of the hawk. So we want to ignore, the parrot is 3 big, we want to ignore it. We also want to ignore the takahe, which is 2 big. But 1 big, the larger picture of the hawk, that's the one that we want to do something to. And so the action is when we click on this thumbnail, we want the bigger image of the hawk to appear. So we've got 3 choices: ignore, hide, and show. Let's try show. I think that's the one we want to work with. Okay, so ideally, if this works, when we click on the hawk, the bigger picture of the hawk should show. All right, let's do the same thing for the takahe. We'll click on it, and we're going to add the action of show, hide, buttons, and forms. Again, we're going to ignore the 3 thumbnails, but in this case, the larger picture that we want it to show is 2 big, or the bigger picture of the second image, which is the takahe. So let's click on that and put it to hide, or to show, excuse me. And then the third one, the parrot, we want it to show this one, which is 3 big. So we click on it, add the action of show, hide, buttons, and forms, and on 3 big, we want it to appear. And notice we're ignoring everything else. So same thing with 2 big, it's show with the 2 thumbnail, it's show 2 big, ignore everything else. With the first thumbnail, it's show the 1 big and ignore everything else. So let's check and see what we have so far here. Let's go into this e-publishing preview. Click on this little bottom icon here that's tiny, and let the preview come up. Let's see if I can get this to display a little bit bigger. There we go. And if I click on the first thumbnail, the bigger image shows up. That's good. If I click on the second thumbnail, it shows up, and so forth. So these are all working. Problem is, we end up with this stack, which we don't really want because that looks a little bit ugly. So what we now have to do is create some actions that go with these items so that when we click on them, they go away and we get back to our original layout. So let's go ahead and close this. So to get rid of these, if the way we made them appear when we clicked on the thumbnails was to set them as visible, which of these commands do you think we need to click on to make them invisible? I'm guessing it's the hide. So let's try that. Now in this case, instead of the thumbnails, we want to start with the actual images. So I'm going to click here on our first one, which is 1 big. That's the one that corresponds with the thumbnail of the Harris Hawk. We're going to add an action to the on-click event. That means when we click on the big version of it, we want it to show, hide, buttons, and forms. We want 1 big to disappear or to hide, right? All of the other items we're going to ignore. Now for the second one, the takahe, let's select it. We want to do the same thing. So that's 2 big, and we want to change that to on click. For some reason I didn't change that. That's originally it was on release, but we want to make sure it's on click. We're going to add the action show, hide, buttons, and forms, and this one is 2 big. Well, it's not too big, it's just the right size, but its name is 2 big. And we're going to hide it. And we're going to ignore everything else. And then for the third one, click on it. Change the event to on click. Action is show hide buttons and forms, and that one is 3 big. We're going to hide it. Okay, we're pretty much done except for exporting this as a PDF and the fact that I haven't saved this file. So let's save this file as an InDesign file first. And I'm going to put this into where I have these images stored. We're going to call this button test or something like that. And save the InDesign document itself. All right, now to export this as a PDF, what we want to do is go to our File menu and go. We don't want to do Adobe PDF presets because that's going to give us print PDFs. We want to go to File, Export. And then when the PDF comes up, we want to make sure that in the dialog box we've got PDF Interactive as our format, and that's going to save all these interactive features. Same thing as if you put hyperlinks in there, you're going to put a video in for your final project, all these kind of things. You need this format to be Adobe PDF Interactive. So let's go ahead and click Save. And then for now, all these defaults are just fine. We're just going to go ahead and say export, and it's going to create our PDF. I have my computer's default settings for PDFs to display in this application right here, Adobe Acrobat. I would suggest you do the same. Many of your computers may have Preview as the application that opens PDFs. Preview will not support interactivity. You need to use Acrobat. And if you send your interactive PDFs to people, you need to maybe give them a cue to say it's not going to work in Preview because it doesn't support interactivity. You have to look at this in Acrobat. So here's our file in Acrobat, and let's check it. We click there. There goes the Harris hawk taking off from the cactus. There's the Takahe. There's our parrot. And that's it. It's magic.